Today, the Environment Canterbury Commissioners have received the report and recommendations of an independent hearing panel in respect of submissions that were made to proposed Plan Change 4 to the Land and Water Regional Plan. The Land and Water Regional Plan is constructed in two parts. It has region-wide rules and it has sub-regional chapters. Plan Change 4 is related only to the regional-wide rules. It does not cover the sub-regional chapters to the extent that they are now in place. So this was not a zone committee exercise. This was an exercise engaged in directly by Environment Canterbury to address some issues that have arisen with the implementation of the Land and Water Regional Plan, which was finally made substantially operative, although not fully operative, at the beginning of September last year. Prior to that, we had ascertained that there were some implementation issues, and there were also a number of more substantive issues that we wished to address arising out of processes that have been engaged in with the Land and Water Regional Plan at the region-wide level. The Commissioners have accepted the recommendations of the hearing panel, a hearing panel that was chaired by a former Environment Court judge, David Shepherd, and those recommendations for changes to Plan Change 4 have become the decisions of the Council on the submissions that were made to it. That decision will be notified on the 30th of July. And then the plan change will be legally amended accordingly. The plan change, as I've indicated, does make some relatively minor corrections. Some are almost typographical, but it addresses 5 issues that are of more substance, and the first, and they are these: better protection of inanga spawning habitat. Again, I emphasise at the region-wide level. Preservation of the biodiversity and natural character of Canterbury's braided rivers, including their margins. That's to do with vegetation clearance in relation to rivers. Better management of community drinking water supplies and the extent of any protection zones applied to these supplies. And a principal issue there was what qualified as a community drinking water supply. The numbers have been reduced for the number of people who would be serviced by such a supply down to 25 to cover a lot more of the smaller ones throughout the region that were not earlier covered by the plan. Stock exclusion particularly from high country lakes, which I can address in more detail shortly, and some matters to do with reticulated stormwater systems, particularly in the urban areas. And there have been rule changes and policy changes made in respect of each of those topics.
So when it comes to stock exclusion in those lakes, obviously it's those those smaller farms. Do you think that that will help compliance? Because we have had past issues that have been in the media around stock going into those different lakes. Do you think that will get rid of that non-compliance that we're currently seeing?
No, it won't, because the non-compliance you're talking about, I think, is non-compliance with the rules that will still apply to waterways and in particular to lakes. The burden of the change here is that in some of the high country areas, and that's defined, hill and high country areas are defined in the plan as being areas of farmland over the 600 metre contour and of slopes of more than 20 degrees. In some of those areas where there are on-farm ponds, for example, and small lakes, in vast, extensive farming areas where there aren't intensive stocking rates, it is impractical to ensure that cattle, and this particular change addresses only cattle, do not stand in those waterways. Some of them are on-farm ponds that have been built specifically for that purpose. So as long as they don't discharge into a river or stream, they are excluded from the need for compliance, and so are other small lakes and tarns and other waterways that might be generally described as lakes. The majority of the confirmed breaches, and it's important to understand that while there have been in the media reference to a number of complaints about stock and waterways, not all of those complaints have been verified. But of the ones that have, and I suppose one that is of most interest across the region and probably the country is the station, the high country station up at Lake Taylor, which is probably what your question's addressed to. And the answer to your question is that Lake Taylor will still be an excluded lake, because it happens actually to be below 600 metres. It's about 580 or something, and the land is not at 20 degrees slope.
Okay, so it will mostly affect those farmers who would have otherwise...
Sorry?
So it will mostly affect those farmers who would have otherwise been penalised for, water that's on their land and probably isn't going to be used by the public at all.
I'm not with you on your question, sorry.
No, sorry. So I just mean that with this these particular farms that you're speaking about,
yes,
this water wouldn't go into the like you were saying before, wouldn't be going into streams or anything along those lines.
No.
Okay.
No.
And with this community drinking water policy, I saw that it's now down to 25 people. How many sort of communities would that really affect? Do you think that it will make... What sort of communities are we talking about here, and what's the difference in sort of changing it to that 25 mark?
I don't know the numbers, but I do know, and Olivia, it was over 200 before, wasn't it?
It was previously defined as a supply of 500.
500, yeah. Yes.
So now it's been reduced
to 25. So it will cover a whole lot of smaller communities, and the Mackenzie District Council also asked us to include specifically 3 other even smaller communities, one just out of Fairlie, I think, and a couple of others in its district where there are less than 25, but they are recognised community suppliers, and we've done that. And the purpose, of course, of those provisions is to enable the sources of those drinking water supplies to be protected by a rule framework. So it will permeate throughout the region quite widely, I would think. Yeah.
And those sort of protections, can you maybe elaborate on what
Sorry?
those, you said about increasing protections, can you sort of elaborate on what that could mean for those?
Well, that means that land uses that might affect the quality of those water supplies are quite strictly controlled, and in some cases I think prohibited.
Okay. And just the changes that have been made, do you think that it will make a difference? Because I know you talk about spawning sites and
Yes.
things like that.
Inanga spawning sites? Yeah.
Pardon?
Inanga
Inanga
spawning sites have been addressed.
Yeah.
Salmon spawning sites that are referred to in the land remain the same. And what we've done with the Inanga spawning sites is that previously in the Land and Water Plan there were some identified known sites. There was some modelling work done to try to ascertain what other sites there might be, and also to ascertain potential Inanga spawning sites. And in the change as publicly notified, there was an attempt made to identify all those quite specifically. That became a rather difficult exercise, as it turns out. And so we've moved away from specifying Inanga spawning sites in the plan to requiring all Inanga spawning sites to be protected in relation to other activities that are controlled by their own rules. So when people are wanting to do something in a river or stream or in an area where the modelling shows that there could be an Inanga spawning site, they will have to provide for their protection. I think that's basically it. Yes. So it actually, in some cases, will give more protection than would have otherwise been the case.
Okay.
Yes.